Hey everybody, here to just show you guys a couple things today in Java as an introduction. Yesterday I had you guys walk through this Carl setup, and we're gonna maybe do a few things in there, but a lot of it we're just gonna do with like some basic Java code. So I'm gonna kind of show you some of the syntax in another program, show you how to create a program in Java that might work in some way. So what I wanted to show you first, though, however, is this thing in Eclipse is probably showing up for you if you just installed Eclipse, and it's just pulling new feed, and you can hit OK, and then it'll just pop up again, which can be a little bit annoying. So I'm going to show you guys the settings to get rid of that. So if you click under Window and you go to Preferences, you're going to see that you get under General, and you go down to news. There's an option here and enable automatic news polling, and then you can uncheck that box, and then if you then hit apply and close, you shouldn't see that box pop up anymore. So okay, anyway, so let's get into some of the basic syntax. So we talked yesterday just about setting up our workspace, and we can run this Carl application, and we can see that we get a maze.txt file that pops up, and Carl's in that maze. And so one of the things we might want to do is try and program him to move through this maze and get to this light square at the end. And in order to do this, we're going to need to know what commands we have available to us in Carl. We're also going to need to know some of the basic Java syntax. And so I'm gonna teach you a few things here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up and create a new class where we're going to be able to write some notes. So if you go over to your project, Package Explorer. Now, if you accidentally X out of this tab and your code looks like this right now, then you're going to have to go up to Window, and under Show View, you're going to have to hit Package Explorer, and that will pop this tab back up. And then under Carl, we're going to go ahead and right click on the default package. You can expand it, doesn't matter. We're going to right click on the default package and hit new class. And so this is how, if we wanted to create a new program, this is how we would do that. We'd create a new project, and then we'd create a new class within that project. All right, and I'm just going to call this Hello World. This will just be our first program that we write. Now, Eclipse has a couple built-in things, one of which is allows you to build in a main method into your class that you created, which is this first checkbox. And so if we check this, it'll say public static void main string args. This is going to actually run code, and it'll put a little piece of code into this file when it creates it. So we can hit finish, and then you can see that we get a file that pops up in our Explorer here. All right, and so what does this file look like? So here we've got a few things. The first of which is this public class hello world. Every Java file, you can look at each of these: public class main, public class Carl. Every file that is some file name .java has to start with public class and then the file name. It has to match in terms. So Eclipse will automatically build this file for you, but that's why it builds it this way. This name here has to match the name of the file. Okay, and then we have this other line of code here, which you'll notice is in some of the programs. So in main, for example, we can see the same syntax is located here. But if I look in Carl, for example, I don't have that at the beginning or really anywhere in that code. And so a main method allows you to run this class as a Java application. You'll notice that if I try to run carl.java, there's no run configuration. Versus when I tried to run main, there was a Java application. And that's because of this main method. So if you want a class to be able to run in Java, you need this public static void main method. And then it says to do auto-generated method stuff, letting you know that, hey, this is auto-generated and you need to fill in some notes here. All right, so a couple things in Eclipse. First and foremost is we can do something commenting just like we did with Alice, where we can write a single line comment with 2 slashes. And then we can also do something called a block comment using a backslash asterisk and then hitting enter, and Eclipse will fill in. And then this can be a multi-line comment, or something we like to call a block comment. And that means you can just keep adding lines to it, as many as you want. And then finally, there's a third type of comment in Java syntax, which is 2 asterisks. And if we enter, you'll notice that it adds a strange little thing here, at param. And this is Java doc. This is like what we refer to as Java doc or Java documentation. This is useful for describing what a method does, or a class. You could do this for your class as well. And what's pretty cool about this is Java can automatically create documentation for classes that you write. What you'll notice is that if I hover over my mouse cursor over the main method, a little pop-up box shows up. And actually, you can see the stuff that I just typed in that comment actually shows up in this box right here. And if you type something else, it'll pop up in this box. So what's interesting is that if I'm in another class and then I call this method, and I want to know what this method is doing, I can actually just hover over the name of the method, and it'll actually bring up this Java doc. So this is just a way of telling programmers that might be using your code how to use it. All right. And so we'll be Java docking our methods when we write them, and so we'll get in the habit of doing this. But it's / and then 2 asterisks. How you write that, and then you close with an asterisk and a /. Okay, so we have our main method. None of the Java ignores all these lines of code because they're all comments, and so you could write whatever you want in there, and it won't see any of those. So the first line of code that it sees is this, and now we can write some stuff inside of this. So today I wanted to just show you guys basic variables, how to create variables in Java, because this is one of the things that we're going to need to be able to do as we go on. It's pretty important. Variables are going to be useful for all types of programs. So it's pretty important that you understand how to create them and how to use them in your code. We're gonna talk for loops and if statements later in the week. In terms of on Thursday and Friday, I'll do for loops today. We're gonna talk some of the logical conditionals later on this week. But we're gonna basically cover variables, and then I'm gonna show you guys for loops. And then finally, we're gonna just look at some of the intro to Carl syntax, and we'll go into there. But variables in Java are very interesting because they are typed, which means that you need to tell Java what type of variable this is going to be. Just like we did in Alice, whenever we created a variable, it popped up the box and it said, this is going to be a variable type of whole number. This is going to be a variable type number of decimal number. This is going to be a variable type of Boolean. We do that same thing in Java. So let's say create a string variable, we actually type the keyword string, and then this will be the variable name, which we could name string var or something like that. Now, one of the Java syntaxes is this semicolon thing. At the end of every line of code, except for methods and class headers, and then like loops and other structures. So brackets are used to provide scope, to tell Java where this method is defined, or where this class is defined, or where this loop is defined. The semicolon is to say this statement is done. All right. So what this line of code does right here is this declares a variable of type string with the name strvar, which isn't very descriptive name. It depends what we're using this variable for. But this is declaring the variable. And then what we can do later is we can actually initialize the variable to have a given value. And so we can initialize it to have this value, hello world. So this initializes the variable to have the given value, hello world. All right, now we could do this all in one line of code. So for example, if I combine these two lines of code, I can get string variable 2 equals hello. And so this is both declaring and initializing a variable. Okay, so again, these are just string type variables, but I can really have any type of variable that I want. And so, for example, if I wanted to make an integer variable, I could say int x equals 3. And I could initialize the variable to have the name x with the value 3. I could initialize a Boolean variable. And this is our true false variables, that we use to control things. So maybe like, did the user click? And then we could say false, or we could say true as our default values. So true or false are the only two options for Boolean. Notice what happens if I try and do something like this. If I say int x equals 3.0. All right, there's two things actually wrong with this. Okay, the first thing that's, and here we see our first error. Now, Java is what we call a compiled language, which means that the compiler is going to go through the code and make sure that there's no errors before you're allowed to run it. If I try and run this code right now as a Java application, it says there's an error in the project. I can proceed without without asking, and I'll move my errors down here. And you'll see I get an exception in thread main, unresolved compilation errors. All this means is that something isn't right. You either have a typo here or something else. And you can see actually it says that there's a duplicated local variable x, duplicate local variable x. So, and then there's even another type mismatch, cannot convert from double to int. There's actually two compilation errors that they're telling me there. All right, so error number one is I can't name the variable something that I've already given it a value. So maybe I try changing this value to y. Another option would be to just say x equals 3. Once you initialize a variable, this would be assigning the variable a new value. But now I still see another error. Obviously, if I run this again, I'm going to check this box that says always save resources before launching, and then this pop-up won't come up anymore. Every time you hit the run button, your Java file saves, so you don't need to actually worry about saving it as long as you're running your code often. But you can see here I get another compilation error. Type mismatch, cannot convert from double to int. And this is because that I'm trying to save 3.0, which is a double, which is a decimal number. In Alice, so double. In Alice, this was a decimal number. In Java and in other languages, this is called a float or a double. Depending on how much space you want. So a floating point decimal number is half the space, half the memory space of a double. That's why the double, or another way of saying this would be the double is double the memory space of a floating point. decimal number. And so generally speaking, we're not that concerned about memory space, just because our machines have so much of it, that making a variable a double as opposed to making it a float, not going to make a difference in terms of memory use. But if you were trying to minimize memory space because you're running your application on a, maybe a device that doesn't have a huge memory chip or something like that, then, maybe you'd want to use floats instead of doubles. But anyway, um, that's all that means. So we could actually, if we wanted to actually give the value of, we can't do 3.0, I could give it a new value, let's say 4. If I wanted to make a float or a double variable, I would say either float or double, and then I could say, y equals, and then I could say 3.0, and that would be just fine. Now, Java does a weird thing where I actually have to add f to be the floating point decimal. It actually prefers doubles, generally speaking. Let's see. Oh, I got y2. Okay, so it's really up to you on how you want to do this. I generally don't use float very often when I'm coding in Java, so you know it's up to you. I will typically stick with double, but these are all the different variable types that we have. And there's a few other ones. Let's say you want to do an individual character. So that'd be char, and this could be representing a single letter. So let's say I wanted to, represent the letter I. You'll notice I use single quotes for a character. What else? I think that's most of the primitive types. There's a few more, but the ones you're really going to see are string, and you'll notice string actually is like a different color, and this because it's not actually a primitive, it's an object. That's also why it's capitalized and not lowercase. Like all the primitives are lowercase. Int, boolean, float, double, char, are all lowercase, where string is uppercase. So yeah, there's a bunch of other, well, not a bunch other, there's 3 other primitives, but typically you're going to use int, double, boolean, and char. Even float you probably won't use that much. There's a data type called long, which is for integers that are twice as long, and short, which are shorter integers. And I can't think of the 8th one right now off the top of my head, but anyway, so that's creating variables. It's, where would we use these things? Well, anytime you want to keep track of a value and then use it later on. So maybe you want to, make a timer like we did in our Alice games, where we had a timer variable and it looped +1, +1, +1, +1. You can actually assign values to these variables and add values to them. So let's say, for example, I had a variable called score, which was keeping track of my user score. And then every time maybe I have another piece of code that checks to see if I should increment that score. And then what I can do is I can say score equals score +1, and that'll add 1 to that variable. Java has 2 shortcuts for writing, for doing math to a variable. The first one would be plus equals 1. And then the next one, which is unique to, I think, a few languages do this, but I know, like, for instance, Python does not like this syntax, but it's score plus plus. All 3 of these add 1 to that variable. Now, you can do things like score -1, and that would be score minus equals 1, and score minus minus. All 3 of these actually work as well for subtracting 1. And then you can also do things like, let's say I wanted to double the user's score. Then I could do score times 2 or score times 3, whatever that might be. And likewise, I can do times equals 2, and that will multiply by 2. However, there's not like a times times syntax. There is divide. So if I wanted to half it, um, then I could do, divide by 2. So these are just different math operations that are available to us, and there's many more that you could look up and use, and we might see them come up in some different assignments right now. All right, but all we're doing is we're taking an integer variable and we're just modifying it. Now, be careful with this because we can't ever make this a decimal number. So, for example, if my score is equal to 3 and I divide it by 2, we know that in math it's 1.5, but the computer will round that to 1. It will truncate it because it is an integer and not a decimal. So if need that precision, you need that 0.5, then you would want to make this a double instead of a int, and all the syntax would still work just the same. But all right, so that's a real quick tutorial on variables in Java. I'm going to show you the syntax for a for loop, which we can use to play with variables if we'd like to. I should show you guys print statement as well after this, so we can start debugging our code with some line statements. All right, so for loops, this basic syntax, these are like the count loops in Alice. If we want to do something a certain number of times, we would say for, and then it's really important, the syntax here. We have parenthesis, parenthesis. So you'll notice that Eclipse will automatically, when I type left parenthesis, automatically adds a right parenthesis. And then I'm going to put 3 things inside of my for loop. The first thing is the variable that is going to be used to index. And generally speaking, we say int I equals 0, I standing for index. And then setting it equal to 0 as our count. This can initialize to any value. It doesn't have to be 0. It could be 1. It could be 2. It could be 10. It could actually initialize to another variable if you wanted to maybe have a countdown or something like that. The second statement is a conditional. So less than, greater than, equal to, something that's going to evaluate to true or false. Typically speaking, what we do is we say I less than, and then however many times we want to run the loop. So if I want to run 10 times, then I would say I less than 10. And then I need another semicolon after that statement. So these are actually like two statements, if you want to think of it like that. There's like that statement there and that statement there. And then my third and final statement is going to be I++, which we already talked about. That's going to add 1 to I. All right, now we don't generally write it like that. That syntax looks weird. Everything probably looks weird to you guys right now. But generally speaking, we keep all of this on the same line of code. White spacing, I like to put it in here. Some people prefer no white space. It does not matter. You will see that I do tend to put a lot of white space in my code. You'll notice it even up here that I did that. It's just kind of a habit that I've run into. I like it from a readability standpoint, but it does not matter whether or not you have it. Okay, so after you have those 3 components, then you can go ahead and hit the left curly bracket, and then hit enter, and then automatically add a right curly bracket. So these curly brackets define the scope of the for loop. Everything inside of these curly brackets is going to repeat and execute 1 time per loop. This loop is going to execute 10 times. And that's because my variable I is starting at 0. And basically what Java does is say, is 0 less than 10? And yes, it is. And so if it is, then it executes the code, and then it does this I++, which makes I equal to 1. And it says, is 1 less than 10? And yes, it is. So it, again, will do what's in the loop and repeat until, and it'll continue that until I goes up to 10. Once I is equal to 10, 10 is no longer less than 10, and it will end the loop. So for example, let's see what happens when we mess with our variable I here. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys the syntax for a print statement real fast. So it's keyword system with a capital S dot out and then dot print. Print ln actually will add it on a new line, and then whatever we type in inside of here. So I'm going to say start a for loop here, and then a semicolon at the end. So this is our print statement. We can type anything in here. I can put a variable in here. So I can put either a string variable, which we had one called string var. So I can actually put that in here. And then I can run my code, and you'll see that it prints out that string variable. I can actually print other variables in here. So I can print out, for example, I can print out score. Figure out the Control F11 is the shortcut. And it'll print out that score variable. So I can do a lot of different stuff here, but we'll start with the start of the for loop. And then let's say inside of here, let's add another system.out.println. And there's actually a shortcut here with Eclipse. You can type SOP. I think it's, oh no, okay, it's sysout. If you type sysout, I'm stuck in something here. Sysout, and then if this box doesn't show up, type hit Control and spacebar, and it should actually type that system.out.println for you, which is pretty cool. A little bit of a shortcut. In here, I'm just going to print out the variable I and watch what happens. You can see it prints out start of the loop 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 numbers, and then I can at the end print end of the for loop. And now when I run this code, you can see I get a loop that goes from 0 to 9. And then play around with these parameters a little bit. If I change this to like say 2 and 8, what happens? Well, I just get the start loop at 2 and I go up to 7. If I say less than or equal to 8, how does that change it? So now it goes up to and includes 8 instead. So you can play around with these variables. Typically speaking, when you want a loop to execute a certain number of times, you start with I equals 0 and go up I less than 10. But I could certainly say I less than or equal to 9. That's going to do the same thing. So I'm not saying one way is the right way, but it's more conventional. So yeah, play around with the for loops a little bit. Actually, I'm going to wrap up the video here because we're going a little bit long. And so, this gives us a pretty good summary tutorial. We've got basic variables, basic print statements. We'll get into the Carl stuff probably Thursday and Friday and talk if statements, talk while loops, talk a few other things. So until then, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Play around a little bit, see what you can come up with. A couple exercises you could probably do. Just make a really simple variable that maybe keeps track of a number, and then have the for loop. Every time that it executes the for loop, maybe that number doubles or something like that, and see if you can get those numbers to print out. You could try and get for loops to print the numbers 1 to 100. See if you can figure out how to make the for loop print out backwards instead of forward. See if you can figure out how to modify that for loop to do that instead. So there's a couple different things that you guys could do to just practice this a little bit. But that I'm not having you guys turn in anything today, so just hopefully try out some of this stuff, make sure it works. email me with any questions, and I'll, I'll talk to you guys on Thursday.